today we have a very poor organization of important relics and important things that matter to us. We don't have a global effort to organize and keep them all somewhere where people can access them. Now, there are other entrances in the Sphinx. There's one on the rump, on the back. There's one on the head. But the one under the paw was the one that was shown to have the best evidence of being a tunnel that led somewhere. And it's talked about how there's like an ancient library supposedly underneath it and all these things. But it's appalling to think that they would find those subterranean chambers and identify them, and then not only not explore them, but then build on top and block them off. And in this period, they found 3 distinct civilizations that have been there. 3, okay? 3 civilizations, not 1 or 2. And they were all separated by different periods of time. And what they identified as Stratum 1 was the oldest one, and it's below a massive flood layer, just like it's described in the tablets.
I'd like to welcome back to the show, returning champion, Matt LaCroix. How you doing, Matt?
How you doing, Alex? I love being in the studio. This is beautiful what you've done with this.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming, trekking all the way down here to Next Level Soul Studios. I really, really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Our last conversation did pretty well.
Yeah.
And you have a story about what happened to you after that show. What happened?
I do. I guess it would be really good to share that, is that your show was pretty pivotal in my life. And I mean, just beyond even reaching other individuals and helping, show them knowledge, give them knowledge and provide them information. But in my life, I was looking for a pathway to do this full time as my career, not having to work another job and making ancient civilizations, lost civilizations, my core of all my time. And your show was how a very, very important business partner and investor and a very, very good friend, Martin Young, ended up finding me through your show and then transformed my life really subsequently after that to allow for this huge documentary to really come to fruition, as well as scouting trips and expeditions. And now it's turned into a massive, massive team and group of people involved in going to these incredible sites, especially in Eastern Turkey, and really illuminating this lost chapter of our history. So I have to say, without you, Alex, I don't think I would be there. So I truly appreciate it.
Oh man, thank you so much. That's humbling to hear, man. It's I am just a humble podcaster doing the good Lord's work. But I appreciate it, man. Thanks for sharing that story. So you just got back from Turkey and you discovered a few things. You showed me a few images of what you saw. So some cool, very cool stuff that no one's really been talking about or seeing. What did you find over there?
So we visited, I guess we'll say 3 primary sites. There was some other subsequent smaller places we went to, but 3 primary sites that we went to around Lake Van in Eastern Turkey, an area that used to be ancient Armenia back before the 1930s. It was an ancient land, King Haik and this whole lineage that potentially was mysterious, that goes back to lineages that people, were relating to like ancient, almost pre-Christian Mesopotamian connections. So we went there and we were exploring the sites that have really become, I guess, the core of my research and what I'm doing, which isn't really just Turkey, because the symbols and the stonework and a lot of what we see, we then find a lot of other places in the world, such as in Peru, Ollantaytambo, for instance, as well as like Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, and then even places like Saudi Arabia, as well as like Angkor Thom in Cambodia. We're finding these symbols and these ancient structures that seem to have connections around the world. So we visited, the 3 sites we visited, the primary was, of course, Ionis Kalesi, which Ionis Legacy is the name of my company, after that unbelievably incredible temple that once the world finally understands what that temple is and how old it is and the symbols, I think it'll be one of the most holy temples on earth in the future. One of these things where we have a lot of people taking pilgrimages to like Jerusalem and Mecca. I think that this will be on that list in the future.
Why would you say that word holy is interesting to me? What's holy about this?
Holy was a very specific word I used for that, because what we find are depictions of the first, what I believe is the first chalice and the first cross ever, but not a cross that's just something scratched into a wall. Beautifully, beautifully laser cut almost crosses in this andesite at Ionis that is identical to the same cross we see in the Knights Templar called the Red Cross that we also find in the Vatican and the Pope. With the non-Christian cross is the same thing we seem to find the origins back to this point, which really brings up a lot of questions on whether or not they knew about this site somehow far, far back in time, at least knew about this cross. But the more that I've studied ancient Mesopotamian history and history around the world of this, and using individuals, religious scholars like Paul Wallace, who's a big part of this expedition and this documentary, we're really tracing that question of whether or not the Genesis origins of the real cross, the origins of it that we see around the world, came from Ionis. And that is a huge implications on history and even religion itself, and teaching us about, well, what is the origins of religion and divinity and spirituality and consciousness and humanity? And are we finding this legacy that had passed around the world that became the core of nearly every ancient culture around the world, especially the truly ancient ones, the ones that are older than were traditionally shown? And that was one site. And of course, that's the kind of the centerpiece of it. But there's also Chavus Tepe, which I showed you those incredible, what I'm calling ascension basalt pillars. They were still sticking out,
of the ground.
right? Sticking out of the ground, not even excavated. That was incredible to see that, because I knew there was at least one or two of them there. I had seen on some Google images. I had been, searching around on those. And so I literally I would say I kind of ran to that spot to try to see if oh my God, are they really still there? Not one of the things that was lost on me was just how big they are.
Yeah, what's the weight on those things?
Well, they were well over a ton, which made me feel better knowing that that's why no one's taken them yet. Keeping them there, you would have to have some kind of mechanical equipment to move them.
And then transport them, because they're not that next to the highway.
No, it's up on a mountain. You can drive and you have to walk up to, and that was the second site. And then the third one that I showed you that is just absolutely mind blowing, especially if you consider the state of archaeological sites in the world, would be Kef Kalesi. A place where you have to literally hike like 2 miles, rugged territory in the mountains up into this site that has been less than 5% excavated, less than 5%. Everyone's hollering about Göbekli Tepe and being only a certain amount excavated. I think that's far more excavated than this is, especially when you look at images of it and you see these giant basalt pillars and blocks just kind of sticking out of the ground. Like, it looks like if you were, to me, it's like some kind of a sci-fi novel or something. Like you went to a planet somewhere and you found the ruins of an ancient civilization that had never been touched, like sitting there. Like, that's what this felt like. It's a place that is like seemingly lost in time, forgotten by the world.
And when was it found?
It was excavated in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and then really never touched ever again.
And no one talks about it.
And nobody talks about it. The famous Kef box relief, known as Ajijavaz relief also, but it came from Kef Temple. That is something that I've been bringing a lot of attention online with, which is being housed in Ankara. But I always like to tell this story, Alex, is that when they first excavated this giant basalt box, it's a box relief. It's like 3 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet. It's huge. Laser cut symbols. With the importance of what is shown on that, which of course we can talk about, but irregardless of what's shown on that, and it's incredible and it's highly sophisticated and enigmatic, but when that was found, not related to the archaeologists doing it, but it was ultimately decided by somebody to, instead of putting it in a museum or putting it somewhere special, it stayed in an outdoor garden for 20 years, just sitting there obscure. Very few people even knowing about it. And of course, at some point, it got a little bit more attention and ended up in the Ankara Museum right now, the Anatolian History Museum in Ankara, Turkey, which is one of the sites, one of the places that we will be going on the full documentary to go and see that. But the point I'm making is that incredible artifact and these sites were partially excavated and then just seemingly abandoned. Now, is that because of a lack of funding, a lack of interest? Or I would even give a much bigger factor than that. Even beyond that, I would say it's because of a misidentification of who the original builders were, which then downplay the significance of what these sites are.
Okay.
So if the archaeologists, the conventional archaeologists right now that have excavated them, and there's been some excellent ones, and I'm not putting them down for this, there's other levels of spheres of influence, we'll call them, that determine a lot of where antiquities go, how they're identified, things like that. Those archaeologists that have identified, and previously because of other archaeologists that have laid down a foundation, like in Egypt, about who built what, when it was done. Well, when they came along and they found Kef and Shavuz Tepe, they found them almost at the same time. Ionis was later. They found them both at the same time in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and they were convinced that they were part of the Urartu civilization, which existed around 2,800 to 3,000 years ago. For some context for people. The Urartian or Urartu civilization was a very warlike culture, very similar to like the Assyrians of Iraq, a culture that had some interest in knowledge, but seemed like a lot of their culture was focused on being an empire and being at war at times and expanding and doing different things that weren't really related to more spiritual,
more materialistic,
like
more materialistic world. Yeah.
When archaeologists have studied the Urartu civilization, they got a pretty good understanding of what they're like, right? They were an Iron Age culture. They built a lot of iron type of helmets and spears, and what they built is very clear was a lot of warlike things. And they took the symbols. The symbols of the gods that were from the previous culture, and they turned them into war gods. And I'm telling you all this as a frame of reference here for how something like this could happen. So you have a culture that's a war culture. They think they're all war gods. Then they believed that the symbols are related to symbols that the Urartu would use, like spears and lances and things in war, right? So when they came across the Kef Kalesi box relief, they see all these icons on there, and they think, well, kind of, they even said that, like, this is sort of how I'm paraphrasing in the archaeological reports. They're like, well, it really looks like a sphere from like the Tree of Life, like a branch or a bud from the Tree of Life. But our previous archaeologist, that is the great, the great hero of archaeology for Turkey and the Anatolia history, Burney is his name, Burney. Burney identified these as being lances and spears, so I guess they're lances and spears. Imagine if you have spiritual teachings that are at the core of everything, right? You know as well as I do the pine cone and the Tree of Life symbol we see all throughout ancient Sumer and around the world. It's this core, and yet we have it here and it's ignored because the Urartu are supposed to be the ones that built it. And, well, those look kind of like lances and spears a little bit. So they're passing the knowledge of war? No. Could not be further from that, in my opinion. In fact, that's the reason why these things, I think, went completely unnoticed, is that it was like, oh, these are war symbols. They're not important. This is the Urartu culture of 3,000 years ago. We don't know why they built out of basalt and andesite on the bottom that was highly sophisticated and precise, and then all of a sudden they built with brick. They built with mud brick and crude stone. Why would a culture switch? Why would they go from being highly advanced and sophisticated and building the most beautiful stone and foundations, and then build very primitive work on top of it? It doesn't make any sense.
But that's kind of what happens throughout antiquity. It happens a lot in Mesoamerica. A lot of those, those pyramids were built upon other pyramids, upon other pyramids. Even in Egypt, they started off with like the Great Pyramid, and correct me if I'm wrong, which is as perfect as could be, but then they got worse as time went on. The construction amount. You showed me an image of these beautifully designed giant megalithic foundations, and then literally the mud brick on top of it, and it's kind of like you've cut into the side of a mountain, and they just happen to be there.
Yeah.
And so you can see almost as a geological...
Like a tree, like layers of a tree.
A geological thing, like, oh, this is when this happened. You can literally see the foundation being very sophisticated. I mean, extremely. And then you got basic, like, mud brick layers. What is that? What culture was that?
That's the Urartu culture. So the Urartu culture is the ones who we have to remember, well, what kind of culture were they? They were an Iron Age culture. They only had specific tools and means available to them. Like if you were going to create an incredible temple in like those megalithic walls, you would have to have supreme craftsmen, okay, of the best of your culture. And you have to spend an enormous amount of time and resources to make that. The Urartu culture didn't have that. They didn't have those means. Again, their focus was mostly on empire. They were not like that. So it makes sense when we look at, well, they were incorporating these existing structures because they knew they were important, and they somewhat knew the legacy of what was there, and they were building right on top of them. And of course, we see that around the world. But if they could have built with andesite and basalt, they would have, and they clearly didn't, and they couldn't. And that's because of the limitations of what they had available to them. Now, I think the lens of this that might help people is, let's look at the Kali Yuga cycles.
Yeah.
Right? You're very familiar with the Kali Yuga cycles. And it talks about how there's these cycles of, you could call them levels of consciousness in civilizations.
24,000 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's based on this cycle which mimics like the Great Year, and it's this ebb and flow of rising up to reach a supreme place, a golden age, and then being knocked back down, right, to eventually as primitive as an Iron Age, and then a Bronze Age, and then a Silver, and then you're back up to a golden age, and it's this cycle of rising and falling, and it looks like this plays into that extremely well, because we find catastrophic damage on these sites. Catastrophic. In fact, we're looking at whether or not Kef Kalesi might have some of the greatest amount of vitrification damage of any
So what's
site
vitrification?
in the world. Vitrification is a type of melting of the stone. And it's extremely rare.
Right.
It has to do with, number one, those stones have to have been there so long that they were able to be influenced by these events, because these events don't happen very often. These events are, for instance, in my opinion, we haven't had any of these events in at least 12,000 years.
Yeah, since
Not
the Younger
like
Dryas,
this.
like the Younger Dryas.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's when I believe that these events occurred, was the Younger Dryas somewhere around 12,000 years ago. We'll just call it a figure like that. Because it started around 14,500 years ago and went through 11,600 years ago. So it's this totality of different events that was significant enough to completely destroy this civilization, wipe them out. And then whatever survivors might have came about, there seems like there was a rebuilding attempt at some of them, and then they were gone, and then thousands of years went by. Thousands of years. And then the Urartu civilization emerges out of this region and then finds them all. And then it's like, wow. And then it builds right on top of them, and they subsequently call them Kalesis. Okay? Do you know what the word Kalesi means?
What does that mean?
Kalesi means fortress. So an ancient temple of spiritual enlightenment, the Urartu civilization turns them into castles and fortresses. And so then archaeologists come through like, oh, they're castles. So the whole mindset on all these locations has been so skewed that that's why they haven't been looked at as significant. Because they're like, oh, they're just the Urartu culture, and they're not really like, it's not really something to look at, because, they wouldn't have been the ones to leave the greatest symbols and megalithic building we've ever seen behind. And so let's kind of ignore them. And that's why they've remained somewhat, I would say, almost under the radar for over 50 years, which is incredibly wild to think about.
Would you agree that wiping out, as part of what we do in the Yuga cycles, as what is being done to us, that when Atlantis went down, which was about the beginning of the end of that golden
end of
age.
Younger Dryas,
the end of that time period, as part of the plan, none of that information can survive.
No,
it has to go hidden, because if that information survives, it knocks out what we're supposed to be doing.
Yes.
So it goes all the way down.
It was supposed to be lost.
Right. And from my understanding, the Dark Ages is at the bottom. That's the worst.
Right.
That's 600 years to 1,000.
Medieval ages, we were just animals.
Just absolute savages. And that's the rise of religion. You needed religion to control the savages
fighting against each other.
Yeah, I'm like,
and
if you
then-
do that,
yeah.
you're going to go to hell. And these these
yeah.
very controlling ideas and dogmas, because you needed that.
And then they turned into some of the worst of the.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast, without question. But then it's starting to come up, and you can just literally see how we've evolved.
Yes.
And the speed that we're evolving with from 1776 to today, when we became independent,
Yeah.
as a country in the United States, to where we are now. That's what, 200 and something years. That's not.
I know.
It's 300 years. What? That's
a blip.
nothing.
That's nothing.
It's nothing.
I know.
And look, just in our lifetime, what has changed? Just,
Oh my God.
I mean, just in our lifetime. I mean, I was around before remote controls.
I remember. I mean,
the
everything
TV.
was just like VHSs on with TVs.
No, see,
and
see, I'm much
cassettes
older than you, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was around when there was it was just,
The internet was barely even doing anything like when I was young.
when I was young, the internet was created in only in the military.
Yeah.
And it was, the computers filled this room.
Yeah, I know.
That was
These
a computer.
giant
And it was like
computers,
8 megs.
A whole room, yeah.
8 megs was this
Yeah.
entire room. So from there to this,
I know.
to have every bit of information that you want in the world at your
Talk
fingertips.
about acceleration, huh?
Oh yeah, and then also have an AI now,
Right.
who answers questions you have conversations with. That's basically in its infancy still.
It's an acceleration,
So it's super fast.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, where we're going to be,
right?
It's so there. If you just look at it from a historical lens, there's hundreds, thousands of years. Everything was here. All the knowledge was around.
Yeah.
It just hadn't been discovered yet. Radio waves,
Well,
microwaves.
We weren't ready for it yet.
We weren't ready on a conscious level.
Yes.
On a spirit, that's where we go back to the yugas. Our consciousness as humanity has not gotten to a level where we can handle that. Because I always use this example. Imagine if Alexander the Great had machine guns or a rocket launcher. We would have, or God forbid, a nuke. This planet would have been destroyed multiple times already. Because that humanity was not prepared to handle that kind of knowledge.
I'd like to think that he was a better man than that, though. But
But you know what I mean.
yeah. Yeah.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Any Genghis Khan with machine guns.
Yeah,
Any
there you
of
go,
them.
there
Any
you
of
go.
them.
Yeah.
Any of them back in the day. That if they would have those kind of mass,
Yeah.
they already controlled the world. They already killed 40 million. Can you imagine if they all just had machine guns? It would have been insane. They wouldn't have been ready for that.
Yeah.
We were barely ready for the technology we had back then.
I know.
Without destroying ourselves. So all of that it's just fascinating to watch that. Now I wanted to ask you. You've mentioned this in other shows, and I want you to kind of reiterate this. Out of all of humanity's ancient knowledge, how much do you think that's out there right now, underground, in the ocean, things that have been discovered, how much of this ancient knowledge, scrolls, all that stuff, has been discovered, in your opinion? And how much do we have actual access to? And whatever has been discovered, where is it if we don't have it?
I guess that falls into three camps. The first camp is how much of it was destroyed
Right.
over time, which is very easy to do.
Very.
I mean, if anything, it's far easier to lose things than preserve them, based on the elements and disasters and even nomadic groups and other groups that move along and find things and like, oh, I can use that to build into my house. I'll go take some of these out and, oh, I've found something here. Pillaging things, destroying things. Things like the Roman Empire going through in the Crusades and destroying anything that was pre-Christian, burning them. I mean, look at, for instance, the conquistadors going into the Maya and Aztec, and basically destroying 99% of like everything, burning it, and then whatever remained really bringing back and keeping. Like, give you an example. Paul Wallace and I talk about this. The Popol Vuh is like one of the only things that survived in the ancient Maya. And that was only because one of the missionaries there cared about the people's story and actually wrote down what they told him. The Popol Vuh wasn't even based on an original document. It was like they had to try to tell him to write it down because the Spanish had already pretty much destroyed everything else. Now, what about the things that didn't get destroyed? I think that there's a significant amount of ancient teachings, maybe cuneiform tablets, Mayan teachings, Egyptian, various different things from around the world that, of course, are being housed in a place like the Vatican Archive and in a lot of other private collections. Private collections that remain somewhat obscure, where we don't have access to. Let me give you an example. When they found the Royal Ashurbanipal Library in 1849 in ancient Nineveh, Iraq, one of the largest, most significant ancient libraries in the world. It's actually was discussed as being potentially the greatest library ever amassed in history. H.G. Wells actually called it the most precious source of historical information in the world. Was that library? When they found that, they found somewhere between 30 and 40,000 cuneiform tablets.
Holy Jesus.
Now, to this day, less than 500 have ever been translated. Where's the rest of them? Does anybody care? Is there any checks and balances here? Anybody wondering where VA 249 went? We know where VA 243 went. What about VA 249? I'm just making that up.
Sure.
But like 249 is real, but 248, is real. But what I'm saying is, like, there's no one checking this stuff. There's no one putting together a catalog and organizing everything to keeping, all these tablets are all in the same place and organized. We have a display in the British Museum called the Ashurbanipal Library that contains some of the primary. But what about the rest of them? Does anybody care about what all these most important ancient things that have ever been said, where they are, who's translated them? That's what I mean, is that today we have a very poor organization of important relics and important things that matter to us. We don't have a global effort to organize and keep them all somewhere where people can access them.
If you're enjoying this conversation, I invite you to go deeper down the rabbit hole with me on Next Level Soul TV. It's packed with exclusive content like live special guest Q&As, daily podcasts, commercial-free access to the entire Next Level Soul catalog, early access to episodes before they air, and special meditations you won't find anywhere else. We will be adding new exclusive content every month, plus you can connect with me during my monthly live streams. Just go to nextlevelsoul.com/subscribe and join our soulful community today. I'll see you on the inside.
The world should have a database where they want to go in and look up any ancient thing. It doesn't matter what it is. They want to go. There's a whole Mayan catalog. There's an Aztec. There's an Olmec catalog, right? There's a Mesopotamian, Sumerian catalog where they can go and look at. We don't have that. What do you do if you want to find something? Well, you heard of it in a book or someone wrote about it. Then you go online. You're like, I want to see the translation for the myth of Adapa. And you go on and you find a bunch of different things. You don't know where to look. You don't know who's translated what. Some of them are mistranslated. It's
a hodgepodge of everything.
Yeah, it's almost like it's an impossible feat, or it's made really impossible at that time for people to go find these things. And let me give you an example of that, Alex. And because I'm not just going to say that statement without backing it up. Before the expedition to Turkey, one of the parts of the documentary that we filmed was we went to Penn Museum and the Penn Archives, because what's there is a very, very important archaeological paper from 1931 when they had excavated and found an ancient Sumerian city called Shuruppak. And this whole paper documented how there was like a 5-foot alluvial flood layer right above this civilization that matched up exactly how it's talked about, how there was a great flood. The alluvial layer was sterile. There was nothing in it. Right below it, this original stratum 1 layer where the Sumerians were, was most of the things that were there were like scattered and broken or gone, like something had swept everything away. So it's starting to match up with all those things. And so we went to Penn and went through the archives and filmed it as part of the documentary, as the first part of it, before we do all the other parts. And in the archive, you got a chance to look at all the records and everything. And the second part of it, though, was in the museum. And we go in the museum, and some people might not know, but Penn Museum has one of the most important ancient Mesopotamian collections in the world here in the United States.
Okay.
And it just so happens that with someone like me who's literally studied cuneiform tablets like obsessively for over 15 years, I was seeing tablets and things there that I'm like, I know what that is. I knew the shape of it. I've added to 1 million images. I've inserted it. What was really startling to me was very, very important tablets like Eridu Genesis. Okay, I saw it there on the display with a generic name of the flood story. Well, Alex, there's like 6 different sets of tablets that talk about the flood story. It didn't even have a name. And then next to it was one of the versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh and these other ones. There was a Sumerian kingless version too. None of them had any names. None of them did. They weren't even labeled. And I got into a bit of a confrontation, conversation with the lead archaeologist there. And he's a good man, so I don't want to put him down too much. But I was asking, well, why doesn't Eridu Genesis, one of the most important tablets ever written, even have a label? And furthermore, I was with archaeologists on that, and some of those archaeologists that specialize in ancient Mesopotamian history didn't even know what it was either. So I happen to recognize the tablet way it looks because I've used it so many times in my shows and different things. But if an archaeologist isn't going to even recognize what it is, how is anyone from the public ever going to know what's there?
Well, but they're not. The thing is, and I've had archaeologists on the show, and I've had people that dance between the line of where you go and where they are, and the thing is that there's really, to be honest, at least the older generation, no interest.
No, there isn't. But
no
that
interest.
still doesn't justify things not being labeled that are important.
No, agreed, 110%.
I understand there's not an outcry, right? So there's not like a bunch of people, hey, where's the Eridu Genesis tablet? I'm looking for it. No, because nobody knows,
Right.
obviously. But I find it very interesting that something as important as that, and it was the original version, by the way. A lot of these tablets have versions that were written like in Babylonian and Assyrian after, and they're copies of the original. This is the original Eridu Genesis tablet, Alex, sitting there without a name or a label so that nobody would ever know what it is, ever. It's like it could just disappear.
And no one will know.
And nobody would know. And here I am, like, I'm looking, I'm like, oh my God, there's the Eridu Genesis tablet. And I'm making all this noise and everything. But that's what we're running up against, is a world in which it seems as though these important things have been, like these temples in Eastern Turkey I just mentioned or others, they've just gone under the radar. They haven't got much attention. People don't seem to care, and they almost disappeared until individuals like myself were like, wait a minute, what have we missed here? This is huge, right?
I think the audience, or excuse me, the public in general, their interest in ancient history,
it's growing.
And ancient mysteries is massive.
It's getting huge.
If our numbers of our last interview and other interviews that we've done and I've done on the show are any indication, people are fascinated with this
Yes,
stuff.
they are.
Fascinated. And they're being more educated now than ever before.
Yep.
Ever before.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the Vatican for a second because I had a chance to go to the Vatican. And I went to the museum. And as I'm walking around, I went to the Vatican Museum. It was fascinating. I walked around and I just was like almost disgusted by the embarrassments of riches. There's so much. I've never seen any museum have so many artifacts.
Like ancient stuff?
Everything.
Yeah.
Egypt. I mean, from every culture in the world other than their own. It was just like this thievery of, but it was
I love that.
much.
Yeah.
It's obviously been stolen. I mean,
pillaged, right?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, the Egyptians didn't go, here you go.
Here, take
like,
this.
No, they didn't know. It was all taken. And the British Museum's another one, but but the museums around the world, let's not point anybody out. All of them have it. But this one was just so much stuff, so much like that they had like ancient heads, like busts. Just when one of those would be the main event of any museum around the world.
Yeah.
They had 1,000 of them and like it was just so much. It was absolutely amazing. So I was thinking, like, if this is what they're showing us,
Right. What are they not?
I cannot imagine what they have hidden.
Did you try to go in the archive?
They won't. I didn't even try.
You didn't try to like run and like.
Well, there wasn't. No, wasn't. No, there's no sign that says "Here's to the archives." No, it was just the museum, the Vatican
Hey,
Museum.
look, and then you run in.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, look, like oh, the Holy Grail. But I can only imagine that they've been doing this since basically the Roman times.
Yes.
Because I've always said this, and it's almost embarrassing to me how I just realized it when I was in Rome. That it was the Roman Catholic Church. I had never really thought about Rome.
Rome never died, Alex.
I understand that. They just Rome Empire died, went right into the Catholic Church. Constantine and all that
it
stuff.
became the Byzantine Empire. They changed it around.
Yeah, everything, and then they all became
the Holy Roman
They all became
Empire,
Christian because this crazy rebel started causing crap.
Constantine was a bad dude.
Yes, yes, but they changed it to Christianity because they said this Jesus thing's not going away. We got to jump on the bandwagon
Yeah,
here.
totally. I mean, they were pagans before, and they switched over to becoming Christians.
Right, and then 400 years from there, then now they're killing people if you're not
Yes,
Christian.
exactly.
But like a few 100 years earlier, they're like
They were killing people if they were Christian.
You see what I mean? I mean, the Roman Empire. Remember, I was in the Colosseum. That's where they threw the Christians to the tigers and to the lions. I mean, that's
Wow.
what it was. So it was fascinating. And the biggest thing I said when I was I was standing right in the middle of the Vatican outside, looking at St. Peter's and everything. I'm like, this has nothing to do with Jesus.
No.
Has nothing to do with anything that man ever said.
No, of course
This is
not.
all about power. This is all about control. This is it meant. I mean, the opulence, gold
wasn't-
on the walls. I'm
It
like,
wasn't what religion was supposed to become.
no, because any of these great teachers who are on the wall right now behind us, none of them are draped in gold and telling them, "Hey, God told me I need a Lear jet. Please pay me." You know, that's what's happening now.
But the most important thing, Alex, is that they were all teaching that the path is within us.
Yes.
We are our own savior. We don't
Yes.
wait for an external savior. And that's the most
Exactly.
destructive thing, in my opinion, that the church ever did,
Mm-hmm.
was have this meek group have to wait for a savior and not rise up and become their own savior.
Correct. Yeah, and that's still, I mean, that's why people like, oh, you're speaking blasphemy. You aren't God. I'm like, of course we are. We are all.
Exactly.
How can you not say that we are pieces of God or of Source or whatever you want to use?
Fractals of Source, right?
I mean, fractals of Source. Of course, we're made by Him. It's not, we're part of this, everything here, the rock, this wall, this mic, it's all part of it. You know, we are a co-creator of this because somebody invented this. Someone invented this technology, put it together.
Yeah.
It's a co-creation. I came up with this idea of this studio, and it was brought to life by other people as well as
now you get to
myself.
reach millions around the world.
And now we get to reach millions around the world with it. So it is fascinating to me how people are not aware that they have the power within themselves.
I know.
And it's something that was taught by the ancients, especially in the East.
But that's one of the biggest things that limits us as a society, I think.
Correct.
Is how certain religious groups and different individuals forced that kind of paradigm on us, that we can't just become our own savior and rise up and have unlimited potential.
Correct.
And just have this almost like, well, go work there and do this, and shut your mouth when you're not speaking. You're speaking blasphemy, and be quiet and do what you're told.
Yeah, don't ask questions. Don't
Like
ask
that's
questions.
going away now, finally.
Yes.
And we're finally in a place where we're stripping those chains that have held us back for so long.
Yeah, and it is something that the new generation coming up, they just don't buy it. They're not buying into.
It's great, isn't it?
It's fantastic to watch because I see my kids, I see even the younger a little older generations that are already in their 20s now, and they just look at it like, we're not going to go work for a company for 40 years
Right.
and get a gold watch. And if they want to fire us at any time, like, we're not going to religion. This makes no sense to us. Like, what?
The
Like,
old paradigm's collapsing.
it's all of it's cracking. It's
Yeah.
all going away. In 100 years, the establishments, well, we already see the cracks. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church, when I was growing up, was as powerful as you could not even look at it the wrong way. There was no wrong could be done. That's changed. And other organizations around the world, government. I mean, I think Nixon was the kind of first time that everyone was like, wait a minute, our government
oh, right.
is not
finally realized
It's
that
like
there's
it's
more
not.
going on.
There's more happening here, or JFK when JFK got
Right.
assassinated. He's like, what? Just there was a time that was a wake up call for Americans
Yeah.
specifically and the world, and many other in their countries as well. It's just a fascinating idea where we're going.
The hidden hand, right?
There's always that hidden hand, and you know what the funny thing is there's so many conspiracy theories out there. There's so many. I mean, and they were talking for years. But the funny thing is that a lot of the conspiracy theories are starting to kind of make sense. I'm not saying all conspiracy theories are going to eventually make sense, but you could just look at, what happened in the Me Too movement in Hollywood, where I come from. We heard stories about what happened with Harvey. Like, you hear stories about that, and you're like, that can't be real. Or that, or they'll be like, oh, this or that. And I could sit down and tell you stories of stuff I heard back in the day that I was like, oh, well, there they go. And I called everybody who was going to get knocked out. But they were myths. They were myths. They were hearsay. They were conspiracy theories. Oh, that's impossible. There can't be that going on. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, geez.
Right.
What's his name? Oh God, the one who just hung himself in jail.
Epstein? Yeah.
Like literally an island.
Yeah, because he didn't have any secrets to tell anyone, right?
Oh, exactly. That was completely on the up and up. But he had a whole island of that kind of
bad stuff.
Bad stuff happening, which was completely a conspiracy theory. Of like, oh, that's what the Hollywood elite or powerful men go do. And
all the presidents are visiting and everything. Yeah,
it's fascinating.
We know.
So I'm using these as an example of what was once a conspiracy has now been starting to be proven in many, many, many ways.
Yeah.
And ancient civilizations are no different. I mean, the Younger Dryas was a complete myth, a folklore. No one really gave it credibility until Graham came around and Randall came around.
Well, actually, that's a perfect segue to bring up. Is that we should maybe talk about how that started.
Mm-hmm, please.
How did that paradigm get shifted, and how did it begin?
Wasn't it Eric? Eric von?
No. Well, if we want to go back to how the conversation reached more of an academic level, I think that's the best place to start, where people got involved, because it's an announcement that ties very much into what I'm doing right now too. Is that the first person, or one of the most predominant people that started this whole conversation was a man named John Anthony West. John Anthony West was he was way ahead of his time. And he, in Egypt, had noticed that the Sphinx enclosure and the Valley Temple don't match what we're told with things like wind erosion and from the same time period. And there was a couple other researchers before him that had really put forth some information saying, well, I don't think all of Egypt was built at the same time. There's a whole nother chapter here that's mixed in with a later group, and there's evidence now based on erosion of the Sphinx enclosure that may prove that. And so a man was brought in. That man is a great geologist named Robert Schoch. Okay, and Robert Schoch was somewhat of a skeptic coming in to that. He was open-minded, but he admits that he thought maybe the Egyptologists had done a good job and had dated it correctly. And so he's brought in to go look at the Sphinx enclosure to see whether or not it was wind or water erosion. And I guess I can just announce that we have Robert Schoch full-time as part of this documentary and the expeditions going back to Turkey and other places around the world. So it's truly an honor to have such an incredible man and a hero be a part of the work I'm doing. He has a PhD in geology, as well as he's got a BS in anthropology and others. Incredible credentials. So Robert gets brought in from John, who's a good friend of his, brings him in, shows him the Sphinx enclosure, and Robert says he was there for 30 seconds to 1 minute. Okay, I want to say that again. 30 seconds he stood there to possibly up to 1 minute, he says, before he knew it was not wind erosion. That's all it took.
Yeah.
Imagine something collapsing, a paradigm. It takes 30 seconds to look at something and be like, that's not right. That's what we're talking about right now. Is that Robert Schoch stood in front of the Sphinx enclosure and he said, that is not wind erosion. It's clearly water erosion, but not water erosion from just a quick little event. Water erosion from very extensive rainfall, very heavy rainfall during a certain time period, potentially hundreds of years. Now, problem with that is that Egypt is a desert, and there hasn't been any rainfall in Egypt for a long, long, long time. Now, how long? Well, we look in climatic records and we look at when the Sahara wasn't a desert and when it was a little bit more fertile, more of like a grassland maybe, a lot of maybe some trees based on proximity to the Nile River and things like that. But it wasn't like it is now. It was a much more lush place. So we look back and sure enough, the last time there was enough precipitation to be able to create that erosion was during the Younger Dryas. So 11,600 years ago, 12,000 years ago, in that time period. And so that had opened up a whole can of worms, and he was subsequently viciously attacked by mainstream academia, viciously attacked.
Sure.
Because here comes a very, very well-respected academic who still teaches at Boston University. And because remember, not everybody is an academic. Like, give you an example, like Graham Hancock or John Anthony West, they didn't have a degree in archaeology.
They're investigative reporters.
So they're investigating something, but they are not going to be fully heard because they're not an academic that's fully credited. So that was why Robert, all of a sudden, he takes the brunt of all this. He gets viciously attacked for years and years and years from that. And it had a huge impact on certain segments of society looking at this, but archaeologists didn't budge. They didn't budge at all.
Well, they don't want to rewrite the textbooks. That's going to
No,
cost
I
money.
mean, Zahi Hawass and the whole group in Egypt that is
Yeah.
protecting that antiquities there, they didn't budge at all. Egypt started 5,000 years ago or so, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and that's it, right? There's nothing else before that.
Yeah, the Great Pyramid is a tomb. Sure.
Exactly. It's their tombs, Khufu's name's in there, even though we know that's a complete forgery from the 1800s. There was never the name Khufu, the cartouche of Khufu in the Great Pyramid. That was a complete forgery. So it really brings up the question, though, about why something like that would be so fiercely protected. Why? Who cares?
Right.
Why can't we just rewrite the story? Why is it that we're in a world now where the scientific method has failed us?
Right.
The scientific method of, okay, let's take our background as an academic who studied this and knows what they're talking about, geologist that knows what he's talking about. Why can't we just look at things and use science to objectively figure out what they are? Why do we have to have an agenda? Why do we have to build off of whatever somebody else did? Why are we so afraid to step on the toes of others before us and speak about what something is? But that's what it is. It's called the ivory tower of archaeology. Okay? It's a tower of archaeology that's been built off of the legacy of those before them. And whether or not there's a conspiracy woven into that is another whole conversation. But either way, that discovery by Robert Schoch and John Anthony West and others, and then Graham Hancock got brought in, then he got kicked out of Egypt, and now he's back again because he made up with Zahi
Yeah,
Hawass.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that post.
But the point is that we, people like me and you and others that are studying this, it seems so obvious to us.
Of course.
Like, of course, there was a pre-dynastic period of Egypt. They built the Sphinx, and then they built the Great Pyramids, and they built the Valley Temple, and they built all of these things, Tanis and the Osirion and Serapeum. All these were built by this ancient lost civilization in Egypt, these pre-dynastic culture. And then they were wiped out. Poof, right? Just like the Ararat civilization I talk about with the Lake Von region with Ionis and Kef. They're wiped out, and then another culture comes along thousands of years later. They're kind of somewhat primitive-like. Their mindsets aren't the same. They write a bunch of graffiti on everything in the form of hieroglyphics, right? They recarve the Sphinx head.
Right.
That's very, very well established by a lot of scientists, including Robert Schoch. And it's very easy to tell based on
Just the size and
how the head doesn't
dimensions.
look at all with the dimensions. It's offset. It's strange. It's tiny compared to the body. Whereas, and I agree with this, Robert and others believe it was a lion because it was facing Leo. And it was like a guardian lion. And we know that there are subterranean chambers under the Sphinx. One of the most important that was found using ground penetrating radar and different types of technology that looks under the ground. They found a very, very interesting cavity in a tunnel that comes under the front paw of the Sphinx. Okay. Now there are other entrances in the Sphinx. There's one on the rump, on the back. There's one on the head, but the one under the paw was the one that was shown to have the best evidence of being a tunnel that led somewhere. And it's talked about how there's like an ancient library supposedly underneath it and all these things. But it's appalling to think that they would find those subterranean chambers and identify them and then not only not explore them, but then build on top and block them off. So what happened after? They ended up building an enclosure around the Sphinx. It was like a wooden enclosure, and they blocked it off.
How
and they
long?
never went down.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And the whole thing was like, shh, that never happened. Yeah, and I remember so many times they found these subterranean chambers, not on one occasion, on multiple occasions in the last 15, 20 years. They found these subterranean chambers not only under the Great Sphinx, but under the Great Pyramid. And they're not being explored, and they have not been explored, or they've been explored and we haven't seen what's in them. But that is an example of what we're talking about is there's clearly a management of antiquities. We're going to call it a management of antiquities. For what we're allowed to be shown, and then what we're
Why?
No.
Why?
Well, that brings up into the question of why is the doctrine of archaeology so protected? What would happen if we disrupted that doctrine? I think it's has bigger implications than a lot of people give it credit for. Why not just allow the truth to come out? Well, imagine if society and civilization as we know it was understood or on with the masses told, so that everyone's like, oh my God, finally I accept it. Because a lot of people in society won't accept something unless it's announced officially. They're like, oh, that's kind of fun, maybe. But then they that's
until
it.
there's something's in. Until I always say, until the alien comes and lands in the White
In our
House
yard,
lawn
right?
and
Yeah.
comes out and goes, "Hi guys."
Exactly.
They won't. Even then they'll be like, "That's not VFX."
Wait a minute. So I think what we're talking about here is a paradigm that exists. A very carefully created paradigm that goes back actually to Constantine and the Holy Roman Empire. That was a more of a biblical date of 6,000 years. The earth is only 6,000 years old, and civilizations emerged during whatever it is. Those are usually biblical dates that are associated with the 6,000 year period. But right now, there's not supposed to be any civilizations that were civilized, an actual civilization that built things that was beyond 6,000 years ago. It doesn't exist. It's all nomadic hunter-gatherers before 6,000
Just like
years
Göbekli
ago.
Tepe was done by nomadic.
Yeah, they were like, oh,
hunter-gatherers,
this
yeah.
is cool. Let's build an astronomical temple here and use all these resources and build
Giant
multi-ton
megalithic, yeah.
T-stones that have constellations and everything.
And there's a
on them.
ton that hasn't. Most of it hasn't been found yet.
But that's the point, is that we have a doctrine that is fiercely guarded. Fiercely guarded. Anything has to fit into that, because if it's not, let's talk about what would happen.
Well, yeah, the whole thing comes crashing down. But that's in science. That's in medicine.
Everything.
That's in tech. It's everything.
Even in consciousness.
Oh,
Even in understanding our divinity of who we are.
Oh, yeah.
Not coming from a place of being primitive, but coming from a place of almost divinity. And then falling down to a place that's very primitive and forgetting everything. Losing all of what we knew and having to start over again, and thinking that we're at the pinnacle of our entire civilization. And I would argue we're not.
Oh, God.
I would say that these previous civilizations that built things like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and Cusco and Tiwanaku and Pumapunku and the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx and Baalbek, Lebanon and Ionis and Kef Kalesi, and there's many, many others. They're part of a lost chapter that we don't even consider.
But also that would throw evolution completely out of whack.
It would bring up questions of our entire path and how we got here, and about what led us to this, and why we seem to have come from a more pure place spiritually, and that fell to a place that is very disconnected.
So let me ask you this, which brings us perfectly into the next segue, which is the concept of the Anunnaki, which is fascinating.
Sure.
I love the Anunnaki. I just think fascinating story. I'm a storyteller, so I love these stories.
Right.
In the Sumerian text, you mentioned it already, and we have never spoken about it on the show. The King's Tablet.
The Sumerian king list,
Complete list.
and there's others as well, like the Uruk list of kings and sages.
Right.
the
So can you
Ferocious list.
explain to people what that is and how old in the stories or in the list that they're talking about, how far back it goes?
Yeah, and I use I don't even use just those. I use a combination of if many other texts as well. But it gets back to and I guess I can go back to that 1931 excavation of Shuruppak, because it really lays the story. They dug down to a depth of 17 to 20 feet down. And in this period, they found 3 distinct civilizations that have been there. 3, okay? 3 civilizations, not 1 or 2. And they were all separated by different periods of time. And what they identified as Stratum 1 was the oldest one, and it's below a massive flood layer, just like it's described in the tablets. Well, in the Sumerian king list and the Uruk list of kings and sages, and even the Ferocious king list that came out of Babylon, they describe a time long ago. I mean, so long ago that not even during the time of Gilgamesh. That's what's so interesting, is that we think of Gilgamesh, right? An ancient Uruk-Ur. And he's this king that is seeking out immortality, and we have the tablets from him. But in something like, for instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he goes to seek immortality from this legendary Sumerian priest king known as Ziusudra, who is from a whole different time. He finds him, like this is journey in the underworld. And we can get to the Anun in a second, and the Anunnaki. But he finds him and he's like, I want to seek this. I want to find the secrets of immortality. And I love this because Ziusudra says, "Oh, Gilgamesh, I'm from a time long before the memory of even your people ever existed."
And he says that in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah, that we think Gilgamesh in that time is so old, and he's like, well, he's like, I'm from a city called Shuruppak. He says that. That's a time so long before. He says that it was a time when the gods walked amongst men, that the Anunnaki they were in our realm. It was like part of our temples and where we lived was like very different than it is now. And he states that Shuruppak, as from where he was from, was not from the same time as Gilgamesh. He talks about how it was from a time so long before that it would be like if we were from Gilgamesh's time, it's like us trying to consider the ancient past for him. That's how far back it is. Okay? And so there's these different sagas that have happened with the rising and falling of different civilizations. Well, that's exactly what the Sumerian king list says. And exactly like the Uruk list of kings and sages says. It says that there's the original 5 cities that were created. Okay. 5 cities created in ancient Sumer along the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. That was the beginning of everything. It states that the Anuna, which was, by the way, the Anunnaki's original name in Sumer, was the Anuna. Now, the term Anunnaki was an Akkadian or Assyrian term that came after. They essentially mean the same thing. But they state that there was divine places picked, chosen, where they laid they built with brick back then. They didn't use megalithic stone for some reason. And they talked about laying bricks in pure places and then creating humanity in this garden and this is where there's been a lot of stuff online because I did posts recently talking about origins of humanity, what were purposes here, why we were created, and like all that stuff. And then you get a lot of avenues like the Zechariah Sitchin Avenue, which gets into like a slave gold mining thing, which I don't agree at all. And I don't think that any of those translations are accurate. Mm-hmm. Because what I find is that they talk about a story that has to do with doing the workload of the gods, but I think that that's understood in a way that's like slavery, but it's not. Okay? So again, getting back to the Sumerian king list and the Uruk list of kings and sages to stay on there for now, is they talk about these original 5 cities, starting with Eridu and ending in Shuruppak. Mm-hmm. Shuruppak was the last one. And that during those times, the lineages of people, and it's not even just in the Sumerian king list and Uruk list of kings and sages and Babylon, but you see in things like Genesis and in ancient Hebrew texts that talk about, like Enoch, talk about them and the Noah mythos of living for hundreds and hundreds of years, like 500 years, 700 years, maybe even 1,000 years. And it talks about these people that were around that are very different than we are now, that were living, again, enormous amounts of time, seem to have some differences, possibly even slightly genetically differences than us. And that it describes how this event, this complete disaster came through and reset everything. And there's a tablet called the Death of Bilgames that most people have probably never heard of. And Bilgames is another name for Gilgamesh. And in that, it discusses how Gilgamesh is seeking immortality, like I mentioned, and that he was never able to obtain it. And he's told by the gods that Ziusudra, and I'll tell you who Ziusudra is in a second, that he was the last man ever given immortality, ever again. So it's really curious.
But given by who? But given by who?
By the Anuna, the Anunnaki.
Okay.
Now, but it's very curious how there's also lineages shown in these kings lists that are very long, for how long they ruled and how long they potentially lived. And it coincides with this time period where it's shown that we were no longer given immortality, and all of a sudden the ages gets knocked down to like they ruled for like 50 years or something.
And
right?
Before they were ruling for how long?
Hundreds.
The one king.
Yeah. Hundreds, if not 1,000. Mm-hmm. And again, we could get into shars till the cows come home. Whether or not the age of a shar is 3,000 years or it's supposed to, whatever that is. The reason why I don't think that's as important, and that shar is how they measure time in Sumer, is because the same time periods of living for hundreds of years is echoed by many other things.
Yeah.
So it's not like
Supporting evidence.
Yeah, it's not like a misunderstanding of what a shar is, because then you find like, well, in Genesis shows like Enoch lived for like 400, 500 years or whatever it is, right? So we're seeing that across the board of something that happened where humanity became very mortal and then was capped at like 120 years or something. And then something really significant changed there. But that's what we're talking about here. Not only just ages that were different of civilizations, but very different people that seemed to be connected deeply to the gods, to the Anunnaki, in a way that, again, was different than we are now. Again, remember I mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh. He says, Shuruppak was from a time so far before you. The gods were once in it, Shuruppak, like in the city. You can imagine, wait a minute, so the Inuna Anunnaki, which seem to be somewhat like us, we're designed in their image and they're designed in the image of Source, and we're just all part of the same thing, and that they've been like these angels and demons possibly of our reality, these ordainers of destinies. And when we talk about cycle masters, I think they are the cycle masters.
So, but on those tablets,
Yeah.
to my understanding, we're talking about going back not by 10 to 20,000 years. We're talking about 100, 200,000 years.
Well,
Tell me.
that's where it gets into curiosities about whether a shar was actually 3,600 years ago. Now, I have temporarily put that aside for a minute. I do accept the possibility that we're talking about enormous time periods. However, when I'm looking at climatic data and the different rises and falls of different things and when things occurred on the Earth, I am under the impression that story is more like 40 to 50,000 years old. Now, only because I'm trying to find other evidence to corroborate it, right? But it doesn't really matter. It's ancient. It's so long
So yeah,
ago.
if it's 50,000 or 200,000, it's way
Whatever.
beyond the timeline that we've been taught.
Exactly.
It's so far beyond.
At that point, we're kind of getting in the weeds, because all we need to do is prove that, look, our story is far older than we're told. Then we can figure out exactly how old it is.
So isn't it true though that our DNA of Homo sapiens was changed in a very significant way, where there's a cap, there's little caps on our
Yeah.
DNA, and that there's something quote unquote called junk DNA, which makes no
Yes.
sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I love having this conversation with people about it, because just to prove it, like there were many other Homo erectus,
Yeah.
other versions of us out there, the
Yes.
Neanderthals,
and that's
things
well
like that.
documented in the tablets.
Very well, yeah, exactly. So there was multiple
Yes.
that were on the planet at the same time. We arguably were not the best suited. We're not the strongest. We didn't not the strongest. Our skin is not covered in fur, so we burn easily. You know, like it doesn't seem like we're built for the outside.
Because it's not built on survival of the fittest. It's not based on that.
Right,
We're
but-
more like gardeners or stewards of like a great place.
Exactly. So yeah, because
Yeah.
Neanderthals were much stronger than us.
Yeah.
Bigger than us, and actually had a bigger brain, to my understanding, as well. So then all of a sudden, like that, humanity or Homo sapien took over within what, I don't know how many, 100 years, 1,000 years, I don't know what that is, but we became dominant and everybody else just went away. The Neanderthal went away and all the other versions of us went
It took
away.
thousands of years, but yes.
But that's a blink.
No, I know,
That's
definitely.
a blink in
Yeah.
the scope of things. That's not evolution. Evolution doesn't work that fast. Evolution is supposedly long and
Yes.
slow. And
Which gets in the question of whether evolution is more of a microevolution versus a macro.
so can you explain what I've just discussed?
Yeah, exactly. So micro means small changes. Macro means large.
Sure.
And I actually have a great tablet I can bring up that gives us a perfect example of this. And it's called The Myth of Adapa. But before I mention that, I want to just point out a very interesting curiosity about humanity's genes, the genome of humanity. All primates on Earth have 48 chromosomes, right? The ape world and all of them have 48 chromosomes. But for some reason, Homo sapiens sapien is the only one that has 46. So we have 46 chromosomes instead of 48, which is very strange and unusual. How something like that could have happened in nature is beyond me. It seems more of some kind of intervention. Now, does that mean that it's some kind of a science lab? I would caution us on that.
That's very sci-fi.
It may be more of something that's beyond that, a little bit more of like creating something using powers or things that we don't understand. I don't think it was necessarily in a lab with a bunch of lights on with them tinkering.
That's our eyes.
Because that's how we perceive it. I don't think that's how it went. Now, let me give you some context for that. There's a very important set of tablets called the Myth of Adapa. Okay? Now, right away, it's interesting that Adapa is a pretty similar name to Adam. Okay? It's interesting how that lines up. Now, in the Myth of Adapa, it's very curious how it describes how Adapa was created. It says that by Enki, one of the Anunnaki, in perfection among men, the greatest of all. It says the greatest of all the Anunnaki. Okay? It says that essentially Adapa was like a perfect man created, which is very interesting with the parallels with Adam in religious text. But it states that he was the greatest man ever created to be chief among men, meaning that there were humanity exists. There are other men. It's not like there aren't any other Homo sapiens or whatever you want to call them before that. So that brings up the question, okay, so then Adapa wasn't the first man ever created. He was the first perfect man ever created, which means that there were other creations and other men before them. So that brings up the question of, okay, well, why weren't they perfect? And why was Adapa all of a sudden created perfect? And then we have this lineage and connection back to this perfect man in the fall in the garden and all this stuff. But in my research, I can't ignore things that are right there in front of me, even if it's difficult to accept. I pride myself as being a very scientific person that bases things on evidence. And that's something that I can't ignore. It is true that it mentions a previous man that exists that isn't as superior. And then Adapa's created, and then it's like this perfect man. And it's like this superior thing. He's considered a great sage. In fact, he's considered the first great sage of all of humanity. And he ends up leading this group called the Apkallu, which is a group of 7 sages, 7. Just like the Cycle Masters and the Visual Light Spectrum. It's talked about how there are these 7 sages that then travel around the world and spread civilization and create everything. And that the exact same depiction of the Apkallu looks like the same depiction as the Dogon described the Nommo that taught them about the Sirius star system and about all these different aspects. Then it's like, wait a minute. So the Dogon were once Egyptians and they have all this knowledge about Sirius, and then you find out the Great Pyramid of Egypt is exactly aligned with the Queen's Chamber to the star constellation of Canis Major with Sirius and then Orion. It starts to get really interesting, wondering about how that all could have been possible and how all that went down. But clearly our story is fantastic, where we have risen up to the greatest levels we can imagine and created what I believe was truly a golden age of the most precise and astronomically perfect temples aligned to the sun, the earth, the sun, the moon, and the celestial connections like Orion and Sirius and other things to be perfect. And that we were once that. And we had built all of those things. And we had what was probably a beautiful civilization around the world that taught all about hermetic principles and mystic teachings. And these things it looks like all of these ancient places on top of mountains like Machu Picchu were just temples to like reaching high estates and the gods. And then they were all destroyed. And then we forgot everything. Well, yeah. And so let me give you my opinion on because it's very well established in the Bhagavad Gita and others, like you said, with Krishna and others. This is the ancient Indian location now today, right? My opinion on that is that they were describing utter catastrophes on the earth as being a war of the gods. Now, in some ways, it sort of was. Because if, like, give you an example, read the Enuma Elish or Atrahasis. It describes how there's a council of the Enuna that make a decision to destroy humanity. Destroy humanity.
Sure.
And that that decision was extremely regretted after. And that there was conflict between them, these Enuna, over whether it was 7 or 12, whatever it is of them, that they were in conflict about whether or not there was the right choice to do. They describe humanity as becoming too loud. They use the word loud. And I think it has to do with language and different things here, like how Tower of Babel might be related to it. But again, it's this concept of them being in charge of cycles, Okay, so we think of it as such a bad thing. We're like, oh my God, like I can't believe they would just destroy things. And well, look at Shiva and Brahma. Look at the Trinity out of the Hindu culture. Shiva's considered a creator and a destroyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why are we ignoring the destroyer part?
But that's the nature of humanity. That's the nature of material world. We create and it goes.
Well, because that's the cycles of the universe.
Right.
And those cycles are being governed, which is why it's very interesting in the vision of Hermes. You learn that Poimander, the dragon, which is God, which is really interesting that God is, just, by the way, is portrayed as a dragon, which is why it's very interesting how Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl are feathered dragons, which is just the metamorphosis of the serpent into its highest form. Okay, wings. Now, it's described in that how cycles govern everything here. Okay, in the vision of Hermes, it says that cycles govern everything here and that they will continue endlessly and that all time is a loop and that there is no beginning and there is no end. There is not.
We just go along for the ride.
It just loops over and over again, which means that we are entering our golden age. Now, how long were they in a golden age? Our previous, not Anunnaki, our previous civilization here that built the pyramids and built all the stuff I'm talking about at Lake Vaughn. I think their golden age was 18,000 years. Which, if we think that's short, imagine all that humanity has done in 500 years.
Absolutely.
Right? Now imagine if we had a golden age that lasted for 18,000 to 20,000 years.
The video games would be very, very good.
They built the most incredible things we can imagine.
Sure.
But even though they lived pious lives and they were spiritually ascended and higher, I think that we're only allowed in this game to reach a certain level before we get knocked down. Now, that's not supposed to be a fear statement, and that doesn't mean at all that we're about to get knocked down anytime soon.
No.
I want to be super clear about that. It just means that there's like an endless game here that's based on something very specific, Alex.
Yeah.
It's based on souls' growth in the physical and non-physical spiritual realms. And we seem like we're souls that come from potentially all over the universe, and that what's been created here is just a school. It's
Right.
like tending the garden, right?
Right.
You're tending the garden here, but the problem is that we forgot that we're gardeners.
Right. And
We
going,
completely forgot, and we trash and destroy this planet. We don't realize that it's like a sacred crystal planet that is one of the most important planets of life, I think, in the universe.
and it's so from a soul's point of view, then humanity, or let's just say Earth right now, is going through cycles. It's constantly going through cycles.
Yeah.
And if let's say you're up in heaven.
Just like the sun is, and
Yeah,
just like
exactly.
everything is.
Yeah, so we're up in heaven. Let's say I'm using that. Up in the spiritual realm. And we're looking down. We're like, oh, God, I need to learn this lesson, this lesson, this lesson.
Right.
Man, if I really want it hard, I'm going to have to wait till these guys get to the Dark
Right.
Ages again.
Timing, right?
Yeah,
Specifically,
so I'm gonna
yeah.
it's like almost a hopscotch. You're like, okay, and now, I'm gonna
Right,
I want to be there for when the internet is born. I want to take advantage of that. I'm gonna be able to. I want to learn what being famous is, but that's not gonna be available to me in the 1700s. Not the way it's gonna be available to me
Right.
in the early 2000s when I jump on this thing called TikTok or I jump on YouTube or
Yeah.
something like. I'm using this as an example to figure out how I
Yeah.
treat fame. I want to learn about fame. I want to learn about fortune, and I want to lose it all. And this is all planned. Like I want to lose
Yeah.
it all because I just get so far out there. I'm going to lose it all, and I want to see how I can build myself back up. This is a school, so
Yes.
it's constantly. So if you're saying that we're constantly in a cycle, which completely makes sense, you jump in, learn, come back out. Okay, when's the next one? Rome. That was a good. Let me get back in. Okay, let me jump in Rome. I'll come in a few cycles in Rome. The Egyptians will be a few cycles, and all that kind of stuff. As souls, reincarnation, coming back and forth. You're constantly learning. That makes a lot of sense to me because when you're saying that there are rules that organize this entire game,
Yes.
that is obvious to anyone who walks because there's something called gravity.
Yeah.
That is a rule. You can't fight it. You can't fight that rule. There's a rule. There's certain things that happen that
Yes.
are not in our control.
No.
You and I are born. You and I will die.
Yes.
What time that period is when we die, we know when we come in. That we have control of. We have control of, from the other side, have control of when we're born, who we're born to, circumstances, and so on. How we die, we don't know what it is. We don't know when the end game is for us.
That would spoil the whole thing.
That would
wouldn't
spoil the whole thing. Imagine if you're like, you've got until September 32nd.
Right.
32nd, listen to me. But maybe in another universe. December 22nd, 2079. That's when you're going out
Boom. That's it.
and that's it, and you're going to have fun. So you got until then to make the most of this. Well, if we had that end date, it kind of changed the game a little bit for us.
That's not fun if you know that.
Right. Well, imagine if Mario knows how to get through level 2, and and avoid everything. It's not fun anymore.
No.
They need that giant mushroom to come out and crush it to understand. Oh, I learned that one. Well, let me come back with my next life.
Yeah.
My next life, it's a video game. And our next life, we come back and we keep trying it. It's. I'm not degrading or I'm not diminishing what we're going through, as this is just a video game. But it is, as many of the sages, especially the ones on this wall, said, this is not to be taken so seriously.
No, it's fun.
It's fun. This is, and from near-death experiences I've spoken to, and
it's not real.
It's not real. This is not the real.
It's a complete illusion.
This is not real.
Yes.
And now quantum physics is talking about it. Now, my favorite movie, The Matrix, talked about it and really put that out into the zeitgeist in a very, very big way. It's just fascinating about all of that. And that's why I wanted to bring back, because I've never asked that question. I'm like, all this stuff with ancient, what does it mean for our soul?
Right. Let me talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, man.
The first thing is, let's look at ancient Egypt. We find out that if we find out that souls are judged. It's shown in a lot of steles or in murals where they show a scale with a human feather, with a feather on it, and then a human heart, like, and it measures the weight, and if it weighs more than the feather, it means that you have to come back again into this incarnation cycle. Now, just like in any school, some schools you sometimes have to repeat grades.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know what,
you
man?
did not
Listen,
learn that.
Like you didn't quite get this grade down. Let's just do it over again and maybe you can get it, right? It's okay. Everybody's progressing at their own level. I think that's how souls are, is that we seem to be at many different levels here. Some look like they've already graduated, but they decided they want to come back. And then others are like, I don't know what's going on here. I'm just like figuring it out, right? And I think that that's the purpose, is that it's a school with a lot of souls at very different levels, all at different points. Because if you haven't ascended a certain place, which is very difficult to do, by the way, I think the ascension process of a soul here is not easy. Right? It's like the great masters, like Buddha or something.
Yeah, Buddha,
where
exactly.
once you do that, I think you have the choice to come back whenever you want. And
you got the
may
PhD.
not, though.
Yeah, you have your PhD and you're like, I love humanity so much, I'm going to come back and help the other ones out. Or you just go on to the next one.
That's just my opinion based on what I've looked at, is that there may be a decision you can make based on if you graduate, where if you don't graduate, maybe those decisions aren't quite as available to you. Like if you had to repeat a grade. It's not really your decision, is it? You're like, I got to repeat that grade. So that's where it comes in. Now, I want to give an example of how I think these cycles are governed. Now, again, that means that our souls are being judged. Who's judging them? It's kind of weird, right? Well, you find out that in the tablets, in the Legend of Etana and many others, you find out that Enki was in Atrahasis. He was designated to go into the underworld to deal with the determinations of souls. It's talked about that. Determinations of souls, and that's why we see Osiris in Egypt and all these different aspects of like judging souls and all this obsession with the Egyptians and Mesopotamians over the underworld and like tracking where souls would go. They would go through extensive lengths to try to, if someone died, to try to bring their soul back in to like be in that life again. They were obsessed with that, and I think they were obsessed for good reason. Now, let me give you an example. A lot of people listening to this might be good and like reflect on them. Maybe they haven't thought of this yet. If you're progressing in your path, right? Alex is like, man, I'm becoming pretty spiritual. I meditate. I'm eating healthy. I treat everybody really kindly. But man, I had this trauma from earlier in my life that still really haunts me, and I can't get past it. Everything that I've seen shows that your level of consciousness and the path you take is directly governed by how pure and where you are on that level. Give me an example. you are stuck on something you haven't dealt with. You are only going to be able to progress a certain amount in a way with that baggage.
The weight.
You'll be stuck.
Great.
It's like you won't go anywhere. Like you meet Johnny from high school and you're like, wow, Johnny hasn't really changed much since high school. Like
I met those guys.
okay, he's still drinking a 6-pack every day and he's watching NASCAR. And I don't mean to put all those people down, but
Sure.
I'm just like, he hasn't changed at all. He's just still Johnny. That's great. Johnny wants to be Johnny. But you see like someone else who's completely different than high school, right? Like, wow, boy, their path changed, right? And they're very spiritual. They're like a completely different person. I think that's how this goes, where we're being constantly judged on everything we do.
But the one place that I disagree with you slightly is this, that I don't think that there's someone judging us. I think it's us, our higher self, because we're here to learn lessons. As a higher self, our oversoul, let's say, we're looking down, and we it's not that we have to come back. It's we want to come back.
Okay.
Because if you're playing a video game, I don't know if you've ever played a video game, I've gone back into hard levels. I've constantly gone back in, even though it might be frustrating. You might throw a remote on the wall, all of that situation. But when you're playing that game, I got to go back in. I want to figure this out. I want to go back in. I want to figure it out. You could put the game down for a day, 2 days, a month or two, whatever. But you're going to come back. And when you come back, you're going to be at that level in that game. I got to go back in. So I don't think it's as much that there's a judgment of someone else. I think we are the judge. And that's how it's been explained to me by near-death experiencers and other sages that I've spoken to, that there isn't judgment. We are our own judgment. Have you heard of the life review? I'm assuming you heard of the life review. That we are not judged in the life review. We just feel what we did to the other. It's a lesson.
Well, the only reason I guess I'll throw a little something in there that justifies my statement there is that one of the most common phrases used in Sumerian and Akkadian and Babylonian tablets is they call the Anuna at least 12 times. They call them the ordainers of destinies.
Yeah.
Of mankind.
Sure.
Like they're governing our destinies.
Right. They're like the architects.
Yeah, and that we seem to be part of a divine place that is balanced and governed and watched and carefully managed. Cycles of energy here and human consciousness is carefully managed. Because I mean, look at the Middle Ages, like the Dark Ages.
Oh, Jesus.
It's like we weren't allowed to have a different consciousness then.
Right.
And it seems like there's a governing going on here at the same time. Now, I agree with you that the higher self is related to that as well. So I'm not going to take that out. Like, certainly the higher self plays a part in this. But that's just what I mean by there seems to be a progressive system that's based on us, but also based on something external, where we aren't allowed to reach Buddha-like states unless we become pure in that Buddha-like state.
Oh, no, you've got to let go of, you've got to lose the baggage.
So there's these blocks that will, like, let me give you an example of this. Let's say I was to sit down with just someone I meet and tell them every possible spiritual, enlightening thing I possibly could. It may kind of impact them. It may not. Because that person is at their own level. You can't tell someone something. Just like you can't, they have to live and breathe it. They have to become it. So it's more like we have to learn the lessons ourselves. And actually go through them and grow, rather than just being like, oh, well, I know what that is.
Oh, no, you've got to go through
it. You have to be it, right? You have to be
It's not intellectual.
No.
It's a thing.
You can't be aware of spiritual teachings and not be spiritual.
Right.
That doesn't work.
But so on a certain level, though, like as you're progressing on your own consciousness, there's certain things that, let's say you're a gambler and you can't get rid of gambling, and I was a drinker. Oh, I drank, and an addiction. And I got over addiction, but you didn't get over your addiction, which was gambling. As I move forward in my consciousness, let's say I come back in another life, I won't even look at addiction anymore. I conquered it in my other life.
Yeah.
So it just won't even occur to me.
Yeah.
You might even try alcohol, which was your nemesis in your former life. And you go, ugh. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that as our own growth, as soul, as
something you take back with you, right?
Yeah, because look, there's things that we did as kids that we've outgrown.
Yeah, just like the soul will outgrow things too.
Exactly, as we continue to move forward.
Yeah.
But as you evolve to master level of the game, the ascended master level, or a walking master like Babaji or Jesus or Buddha or any of these guys, as you go through that, these other things won't occur to them. So in other words, let's say, I'll use it, please don't get angry. Let's say Buddha and Jesus are walking down the street and there's a strip club. And they're like, you know what, man? It's been a dog's age since I've walked in there.
Why not?
I wouldn't mind. Like, that would never occur to them
you're so far above
because
that.
it's so at a different frequency from where they are. But the thing is that they had to evolve past it, let go of that weight to evolve past it. I always like using the analogy of the ocean. So the ocean, we're all the way at the bottom of the trench, the Mariana Trench. Yeah, we're down there. And when you're down there, man, it's the pressure. You can barely move. As you evolve past certain things, you go higher and higher. The higher you go, things get a little lighter.
Yeah, they definitely do.
They get a little lighter to the point where you can break the surface. Once you break the surface, you have mastered.
And you're never going to go back down there.
You've mastered it.
Yeah.
You've mastered it. So now you're in the air. How free are you in the air versus even at the top 3 feet of water?
Yeah.
Still is something. So that's the evolution of consciousness, is to go past that ocean, to break the ocean.
Yes.
Does that all make sense?
No, it does. And actually, that's a perfect place to add. I want to add something else to what we were saying to the next layer. Is that the vision of Hermes, again, remember, it's the one mind, right? God, source.
Sure.
Is this one mind that creates the archetype, it creates the blueprint. And then the second mind, again, the Anuno, I believe they are they're supposed to be the creators of the universe within that. Then it states, though, that they're non-physical, that they're just creators, and that we're created to merge matter with spirit. That's what they state in that, but they state in a way where like it's never happened before. In the Enuma Elish, they talk about having to take a slain god, and then like the blood, and then infusing whatever they had, which is interesting if it's a non-physical being. I mean, they can obviously become physical, but what I mean is the process of us being created seems to be more like molding something that they state like we're like clay. In the tablets, they call us like being molded like clay into something perfect. But the one I'm trying to make is it's like a hierarchy.
There's an organization to this.
It's this source of created everything. Then there are these creators within, fractals within that are creating everything around it. We get then created by them, which is doing it in a hierarchy of the source. But we're created in that way so that we can experience a physical reality in a physical place and have mortality, but still have a path back to where we started.
Right, because if we're down here for the next, whatever thousand, endlessly, then the game is useless. It's kind of like, I don't know how old, if you remember the game Contra.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? Up, down, left, right, BA, start? Yeah. That's invincibility. I don't know about you. Once you beat the game 45 times.
Did you?
Of course, 1,000 times I beat that game.
Wow.
With the...
It's a hard game.
Yeah, Contra was a hard game, the original one. But once you have invincibility, you fly through it.
Yeah.
After I beat it, I would just sit down and just play it for fun, just to beat it. And then afterwards, I'd go back and go, I want to see if I can beat this without it. And I would literally challenge myself, even though I knew everything that was going to come. I didn't have the weaponry. All I had was the knowledge, and I would test myself. And I use this as an analogy because once you have everything, it gets boring.
Yes. I think actually that's a major reason why we're here, is I think through boredom.
Right. It's like there's so much stuff going on here.
I think that Source created us to experience the ultimate story.
Right. Oh, we're very exciting down here.
This is
the ultimate reality show.
Just imagine the human saga, like being created in perfection, rising up, creating the greatest temples and pyramids the world has ever known, only to all be destroyed and then have to start over again. And then rise back up and not remember who you were.
And it comes, and it's a different timeline.
Yeah, it's a whole different timeline.
Yeah, it's not like we're going to do the same exact technology, the exact same
Then
thing.
you go down a totally different path than you once did, and now you're exploring like AI and all this tech and everything. You're like, wait a minute, though. What about this whole disconnection from spirit? And I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
Is we have everything techie we can use, but now we just need to incorporate and bring us back into spirit and nature. See, that's the core of this. Now, one of the most common things that's shown in these teachings from like the Kef box relief that I talk about that were woven in around the world is this essential component that we must have to being connected to the garden and balance. It shows this over and over again with the tree of life and in these doorways, these triptych doorways of balance. And it describes how there's 3 totalities and 3 aspects of us. And you know this as the Trinity. right? It's the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, but in non-religious terms, it's the mind, the body, and the spirit. And they discuss in that, it shows in that the teachings about how if the three of those are balanced, it unlocks this other door that basically you become like God. Once you unlock and balance all those things. And it's like this teaching of how to achieve our highest states. And it's right there in front of us. It's right there. But one of the cores of it is this essential component of us realizing our place within nature and within the universe and our role within cycles and balance. Balance is the key. It's the theme that's over and over and over shown on everything, is not only us understanding our balance, but understanding our balance within nature, and that we seem to be stewards of this great place. Now, what are we created for then? One of the reasons seems to be to rise up to become the stewards or gardeners of this world. They show them as maintaining that, which is really interesting that it goes all the way back to them maintaining balance here with the earth, like the earth can't on its own. And they have a hand in maintaining balance. You can see that very clearly, and that we're being groomed to be them. That's what it's very interesting when you read, right, the myth of Adapa or Atrahasis. It talks about how we're created to alleviate the workload of the gods. That's what it says. So people are like, oh, does that mean slavery? No, I think it means co-creation within this reality.
Right.
And that we are being we're being groomed to eventually, as a society, rise back up again to become spiritual beings that are tending this garden. What would this world be, Alex, this planet, if everyone just cleaned up all the trash, built with sacred geometry structures, replanted all the trees everywhere, still had cities but woven into nature and into divine sacred principles? What would this world be like? It'd be like a paradise. It would be a garden, a giant paradise garden. I think that's the end game. That's what we're trying to get back to, is realizing our role in doing it. And let me give you another example. If anybody is more in tune with feeling things around them, they go to an inner city, right? Cars beeping and sirens going off, and you're someone who's in tune that comes from nature is gonna be oh my God, I need to get out of here. This is bad, right? This is disruptive. It's horrible for people. Now, some just aren't in tune to that. They don't, that doesn't bother them. But someone like me, that really bothers me. Now, let's take the same example, go to a botanical garden, right? Not only just nature, but nature designed really beautifully. We have to play a hand in it, though. We have to be the gardeners in that. Well, someone who's sensitive, go to that place. What does that feel like? Right, you step out, you're sitting in this perfect spot with a little beautiful stream that's been created with a little waterfall that goes over full of flowers. You're sitting maybe in this beautiful spot under a big tree, this perfect meditation spot. The energy is completely different there than it is in that inner city. Why?
Because it's different.
But why is the energy different? What are we doing there? What's happening there, Alex?
Well, the difference is, so say it again. So we're talking about
some sacred geometry with plants and water and something beautiful that's been designed.
And then
inner city. An inner city that's built with bad things metal and rough things.
One is built with consciousness, and the frequency of that consciousness is on a much higher level, where the other one is also built with consciousness, but at a very low level.
Are they both the earth?
They're both exactly, yeah, but the frequency is different.
Well, then why don't we just create the whole world like that then?
Well, because people aren't all at the same frequency.
We haven't gotten to that point yet.
Correct.
But that's what I'm saying, is that's why we're stewards. We're supposed to create a paradise here.
Yeah.
We're supposed to create a new Eden.
Eventually,
we're supposed to turn this world and I want to tell you why. Some people are who cares about all these gardens and stuff? What does that do? I think it creates magic, literal magic with a K at the end. Not sleight of hand magic, but actual energetic magic. I think it changes our entire ability to create, our entire ability to be a higher form and to be a higher spiritual being. It requires that.
But what you're saying is something that has been talked about in the yogic texts and the Vedic texts for years. The yogis who eventually get to master level in this form, and they eventually could become ascended masters, but many of them just leave, and many do come back. But they're able to manifest things, yogic powers, that manifest
Right, like
things.
levitating and stuff.
Levitating and being biolocation, and and then you look at Jesus' story and you're like, well, he's a great yogi.
Yeah, of course. Just like all the sages of history.
All of them, Buddha, all of them.
It's been the same thing all along.
It's all the same thing.
Just like Adapa, it's the same thing.
Exactly. So they're all just at a higher level to create. We're all trying to get
guide
there.
the rest of them.
We're all, and they're shown as examples of what you can become.
Yes.
Jesus literally said it. He's
Yes.
like, you can do what I can do and more.
But like it was almost like our consciousness at that time wasn't ready.
No.
We had to have those for a future time.
Right.
To leave behind, which is interesting. Again, it gets into the like governing of consciousness and levels of where we're supposed to be. But I'm the more I've looked into all of it, the more, like, give me an example. Look at ancient Sumer, like Babylon, the Babylonian gardens, the hanging gardens.
Yeah.
They were creating these places because they knew. A lot of Hindu temples, same thing.
Oh.
All these practices of where these great sages and masters were, they weren't in some disgusting, trash-ridden place. They were meditating in a beautiful, pure place. And again, I get back to that term that the Yanuna used when creating the first cities ever. They said, in pure places. Lay the bricks in pure places. There's an energy here. There's an energy that we have to understand that's relating to this. And now we go and like seek those places because they're beautiful, but we don't create them. And I find that very interesting, the disconnect between us creating those and us being like, oh, hey, I want to go camping because I can't stand it here any longer, so I'm going to go up into the mountains.
But the belief in ourselves is that we can't create
No, because we haven't
not
understood
divine.
that we're creatures yet, that we're divine creators of the universe.
Exactly. That's what sacred geometry is.
Yeah,
That is
and
all
that's
that
the
stuff.
point, is that can you take this incredibly powerful being that's a creator and put it into a mortal body, have it forget nearly everything, and then see what happens. I want to add one more thing. In the vision of Hermes, again, one more thing is it describes how mankind ended up falling in love with its shadow. It fell in love with its shadow in the material realm of this place, and that it ended up becoming almost bound to it because it wanted to exist here so much that it fought against being a spiritual being.
Right. Oh, this is
and
very
then sending
enticing.
back out.
Yeah, this is very
And so
intoxicating.
we become lost in the illusion here without realizing that this is just the teaching school for reaching higher souls and creating a beautiful garden. Again, I want to reiterate, one day, within the next couple hundred years, we will get to the point where our earth will become a paradise. And then we will unlock all the magic that we've been waiting for all along. We've been waiting for saviors and all these things to come. It's just us. We have to find and become our own savior and put the pieces back together, the remnants of what the ancients were trying to teach us on how to do that all along. It's never going to be handed to us again. The keys were handed to us once, and I believe that was at Ionis. That's why I told you I think that's one of the most holy places on earth. I think the keys were handed to us then on how to create everything. And then we lost them, and it's our job to find them again. And that's the beauty of that story, is that we're finding our way back to where we started, and that's how it's supposed to be.
Matt, I have to ask you, man. You've said in this interview that you're very evidence based.
Yes.
And all your research, you focus on that's you pride yourself on that. Well, we've just been having like a 45-minute conversation about the soul and about higher consciousness and frequencies and all this stuff that have no real place in evidence. I'd love to hear where because you are a very factual person and a very evidence-based person, but yet you had a very esoteric conversation with me about the soul and about the evolution of a soul. Where do you come from? Like, how do you have that belief system?
Well, I mean, where does evidence come from? Are we talking about climatic evidence? Are we talking about something written down? Well, how about nearly every ancient culture around the world saying the same thing? That's your evidence. I mean, again, you look at everything from Hindu cultures to Mesopotamian cultures to, like I said, the Ararat civilization to ancient Peru, ancient Egypt. They're all essentially saying the same thing. They're just saying that the soul is a spiritual being here for a mortal experience that is trying to learn the valuable lessons to grow and ascend. And it really just comes down to slight variations of the same thing. Yeah. Now, the other piece of it is I've lived it. You know, I've taken all those teachings and incorporated them into my life. I've had profound experiences of waking up for the first time when I wasn't awake 15 years ago or so, whatever it was, being at that point where you were a very different person. And you go through this massive awakening that comes in the forms of every different kind of different level and different way for everyone else. For me, it was kind of like a freight train.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. For me, it was like literally within, I would say, 2 weeks, you wouldn't even know who I was. At the end of a 2-week period of having it all, because it all happens when
It's
you're
like a
ready for
download.
it.
It's like a download.
And then you all of a sudden start figuring stuff out, and then you start reformulating your reality, and you're like, oh my God. And so it's the two pieces of evidence I use are ancient tablets and ancient text around the world that all describe incarnation and the soul and the purpose, and like the Hermetic stuff, all of that. But then take and the tablets, they talk about a lot of that as well. But then how about real experiences? Putting into practice the same things that they talked about. What happens? What do you feel? What kind of experiences do you have? And I can tell you that anyone who's had those experiences, out-of-body meditation experiences where they get to some divine place or they get guidance or they have moments of just like pure beauty that are beyond comprehension, you don't need anything else. You end up getting more evidence than you could ever imagine in your life. And then you go on this path of like, on a loudspeaker where you're like, hey guys, what's everyone doing? Come on, don't you? No, everybody's at their own level. Everyone's at their own level as a soul, right? And they have to progress at their own level. And you can't force a horse to drink water.
Oh God, no.
You know, you can't force it, as that old saying goes. Every individual soul has to decide when they're ready.
Right. You can't force them to do it.
And in the end of the day, they can argue till the cows come home if they want to be in this world animated as something that just dies and has no spirit and no connection to source. But you're going to live a pretty empty life. And you're not going to take back a lot with you.
Right.
And so in the end, that's where I come from, is that every ancient teaching, everything seems to be mimicking, especially these new archaeological sites that I'm talking about that have all of those teachings in them, in these reliefs and in these walls carved into them. And you look at it and you're like, wait, so seemingly every spiritual teaching seems to all be in one place here. And you're like, so seems like it was all handed to us at one time. And then what happened to us? Well, we became the greatest civilization we've ever become. And now we're trying to get back to that. But that's the beauty of it, Alex, right? I like to look at it this way. When all else fails, when it seems that all is lost, and we seem to be going the wrong direction, and we are technologically advanced but spiritually primitive, at the last moment where it seems like we're not going to be able to do it, we do. And it's beautiful. Because it's like watching a great movie where you have no idea how the outcome is going to go, and you don't know how it's going to be, but you know that all truly great stories have happy endings. They don't. You can't just all great stories have some kind of a great ending, just like us. But there's no ending. It's just endless cycles of rising up and falling down and rising up and falling down. But in between, there's beauty, there's light, there's love, there's us finally realizing that perhaps having this experience here on Earth and having this experience in a physical reality may be the greatest possible experience you could have. And maybe we're just taking it for granted.
Oh, there's no question that we're taking it for granted. There's no question. Which then, and again, from my research in doing this show and speaking to different people from different walks of life, the concept of this scenario of humanity, or this game being played in other worlds around the universe, because it just makes no sense logically.
Right. No.
There has to be something else. But there's different variations on difficulty.
Right.
And like, hey, I was talking to somebody, a near-death experiencer the other day, like, would you go to a world that there's just not a whole lot going on? Everything's great, cool.
I don't think souls would incarnate there.
They're like, yeah, but if you just kind of like want to chill in the material world and have a couple little challenges here and there, then maybe. Or do you want to go on a roller coaster? He goes, there's this place called Earth.
It's like the party.
Yeah, this is
like where it's at, right?
This is where it's at. And apparently at this time in our cycle,
yes,
is very exciting to be. Because the Dark Ages, that's That's a wooden roller coaster that's been around for a few years.
But one heck of a human story to go through all that, right?
Right.
Imagine like when we had castles and we're fighting each other, and like look at what we've become.
Yeah.
Like we've gone from that back up again,
Right.
and it's just beautiful to see the human story.
No, absolutely. And you go back to, I mean, everyone talks about the Egyptians, but then you go into the Roman times. Rome was around for over 1,000 years. That's a hell of a long dynasty.
The longest empire that's ever lived.
Really. I mean, the Egyptians had it, but they just jumped up and it came and crashed them down. But what Rome did was magnificent. I mean, brutal, but magnificent.
They did great things and bad things.
I think all civilizations do.
Yes, of course.
All empires do.
Yes.
There's no pure
You're
empire.
right. To be an empire is also unsustainable, by the way, as well.
Right.
Always.
Yeah, always, exactly. But what they did was remarkable. And then to see at the end when it came down, and what caused it to go down, and then it goes right into the Roman Catholic Church, which all the riches went into there, all the knowledge went into there. To see where we're now at. I mean, to look back at, look, when I was in Italy and I'm walking around these churches, my wife couldn't walk in with a tank top on to a church. They had to give out like this rinky-dink shawl, like, that's paper, to cover her shoulders because that's too revealing to be in the church. And I'm sitting there going,
we're still there.
Are you out of your mind? Like, it's 2020, it was 2023 when I went. I'm like, what? That's how far down the dogma hole these people were at. I'm like, wow, man, there's a lot of work to be done still.
I know, but it's good work, and we're
man.
progressing exactly the way we're supposed to, and it's beautiful to see that when all seems lost and there's these terrible moments, like horrible wars or things we've gone through.
Of course.
Like humanity always gets through, and I just feel very humbled to be part of such an incredible time right now.
Oh my God!
When we can be here, sitting here, having this conversation
in public,
and to not be worried that I'm going to get hung if I go outside, right?
right.
Burned at the stake or something. But we're in this beautiful time when all of humanity's ideas can at least be shared, and we can talk about all of them. We can come together, and we're naturally getting to that place where humanity is, as a global civilization, is truly getting on a place where we're all finally realizing that we're humans and that we're not competing on anything, and that we're all just here for basically the same reason.
One last question I wanted to ask you, Matt, before we finish up is, you mentioned Antarctica before. What do you think is there, man? I mean, it wasn't always.
Usually, my answer
ice.
on Antarctica is pretty disappointing to people.
Go for it.
And I'll just preface by saying that I have studied quite a bit of geology, and I will say that it's interesting what can happen when you have relatively young mountains that end up getting encased in ice and aren't allowed to have erosion, and they're almost stuck in that state. They can have very sharp edges. Because of the fact that they have no erosion at all.
Right.
And we know the Antarctic ice cap is roughly 500,000 years old. We know that by ice core samples. So a lot of people want me to say, oh, there's a civilization hiding under the ice and those are pyramids sticking up. I can't say that. However, I will add to this. I will add one little piece to that, is that I do think, though, that there's a lot of mysterious things going on in Antarctica. And I think it has more to do with the toroidal energy field of the Earth, though. Regarding technologies and things that are going on down there, way down, maybe relating to preventing some kind of a disaster with our Earth, or preventing the way that the sun is going through very, very large changes right now. And I think my opinion is they're using technologies down there to somehow manipulate the toroidal energy of the Earth because of magnetism. Because of what I think they learned about what happened to the ancients when the magnetic poles start shifting and you get tectonic movements and you get a lot of very, very bad things on the Earth that happen when the sun goes through massive cycles. And it's just part of these cycles. But the real question is, are we in one of those again? And are they quietly preventing something like that from happening. I mean, give you an example. Look at the North Pole. Since the 90s, it's been rapidly shifting, and they've had to go up and do a lot of new readings on where magnetic north is for flying. Oh yeah, flight stuff. It's a big deal. It's been shifting and moving around up there, and that is always indicative of massive increases in sun activity that disrupt the magnetosphere of the Earth, which is what I think destroyed ultimately the lost civilizations of our past.
So do you think the shifts? I mean, from what I understand, they will shift. That Hawaii will be north eventually. Who knows?
I think that those are extreme examples of that have happened. Just a wobble can cause problems. They don't have to shift. North doesn't have to become north and south. Like south doesn't have to become north and north becomes south. That's extreme. I think that might be the end of everything.
That destroys everything.
Yeah, but what we mean is moving to another position. Like give me an example.
45 feet left. We'll screw.
Let me give you an example, actually. If you look at where the ice was during the last ice age, the Laurentide ice sheet, the Scandinavian ice sheets, you'll see that the ice was not around where today would be our poles. Parts of northern Siberia and Alaska were ice-free during the last ice age. Really bizarre that people don't think of. Whereas there was an enormous amount of ice in Canada and parts of, I guess, Scandinavia and other places. But it's revolving around an area that would be what looks very, very like, and temples that have been aligned to magnetic north and true north that are not there anymore suggest that the Earth's axis and where the magnetic north pole is not where it was then. Which shows that it shifted pretty dramatically, which is what could have caused their destruction. Again, that's what I think is maybe going on in Antarctica, is playing around with that because we're so susceptible to it. If the magnetosphere changes too quickly and the poles shift, you can get just colossal catastrophes around the Earth. And so that may be what's going on down there, and certainly we seem to have the ability to potentially like prevent our own destruction in that way. Whereas look at all the pyramids in ancient times and all the temples built on ley lines. They seem to be trying to balance that. That's again that's a whole nother conversation we could get into another show. But whether or not all these temples and pyramids, their purpose was beyond just human consciousness and reaching higher states and everything, but was actually about like being a aspect of balancing the energy of the Earth. And there's evidence in places like the Serapeum where some of the granite boxes literally exploded during the last Younger Dryas, when potentially energy surged through and like destroyed the whole grid. So then that gets into the whole idea of whether or not they were trying to balance that grid and how that always becomes destabilized as part of cycles. And whether or not we have technology now that they didn't have, and that perhaps we could even prevent our own demise. And I don't think that's anytime soon. I'm just saying I think there's a lot more going on now in what we have available to us. It's like, look at us, like we're spiritually primitive compared to them, but maybe we have certain technologies they didn't have.
Right.
And so it's a double-edged sword.
We've mastered the material more than they did, but they mastered the spiritual more than
maybe they didn't do enough on the material.
Right.
Like I'm just saying and speculating is that we may have certain things to our advantage that they didn't have. And I think the spirituality aspect will catch up.
Right, which is right now happening.
Of course it is.
The shifting of the great shift, the awakening that's happening. Why shows like this are being watched by millions and millions.
Exactly.
Where 20 years ago that wouldn't have happened.
We're part of a great story, Alex, that's been unfolding for millennium. Yeah. And we are at the great transition into another age. And that is an exciting time to be here.
Matt, it has been such a pleasure talking to you, brother,
too,
in studio. Where can people find out more about you, your new books that are coming out, and the great work you're doing in the world?
Please check out thestageoftime.com. And I'm actually on my fourth book right now. We had just back in January, I released a book with Billy Carson called The Epic of Humanity. And I'm on my fourth book, which will be, for me, my great legacy. That it's I'm really spending an enormous amount of time, and I'm right in the middle of it, like writing. I was just writing on the plane over here. And it's called The Missing Key of History, The Lost Ararat Civilization, and how I believe that is a missing key around the world that will help us unlock an understanding of our origins, the origins of these symbols and teachings about what we once understood and what once existed long ago in our past. And as I mentioned to you in the beginning of the show, this connection with you, with Martin Young and all the work that I've been doing with creating this incredible documentary and these expeditions, we will be going back to Turkey and including Menorca, Spain, October 1st for the real expedition in the filming with Robert Schock and Paul Wallace and myself and Hans Orheim and others, archaeologists and geologists, to go back and look at these sites and symbols and see if they can completely change the narrative time period of all of history and have us understand these divine symbols in a way that we never have. Something that can potentially bring humanity together around a common place of, wow, we're all just divine beings of the universe, and these are the teachings on how to get back to source.
Well, if I can in any small way help with that, sir, and getting the word out, I am here to be of service. So
thank you. I appreciate it. And so check out my YouTube channel also at Matthew LaCroix and my website at thesageoftime.com for a lot more. But we have a lot of exciting times coming. We have the first expedition, which will be Turkey and Menorca for the documentary. And then part 2 will be Peru and Bolivia. So we have a whole set of countries and locations around the world that we're going to be putting together to connect this whole narrative of lost civilizations, ancient symbols, and origins back to the very beginning.
Well, I am looking forward to seeing all of that, my friend. Thank you again for coming down here. This has been such a great conversation. I cannot wait to our next one, my friend. So I appreciate you for everything you're doing to awaken the planet. So I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.